In the name of equality, this week and next week, we're going to talk about lady murderers. Not ladies who got murdered, ladies who murder. Our two ladies have some similarities, which we'll talk about at the beginning of next week's video. Buckle up. Brooklyn, August 1921. Miss Olivia Stone had been waiting on the northwest corner of South Elliott Place and Lafayette Avenue for Ellis Guy Kincaid to come out of his apartment at 45 South Elliott Place and to cross Lafayette. When she saw him, she shot him 5 times. Lieutenant Farrell just happened to be at a nearby corner waiting for his wife. By the 5th shot, he was able to catch Olivia's arms and she fainted. Kincaid was face down, dead. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack in a few minutes. It had taken her a half hour to revive herself from fainting, which she did at the Classen Avenue police station. Because she was in hysterics, she wasn't told that Kincaid was dead, just that he had been wounded. Her odd response to that was, quote, I'd like to see him, to laugh at him. What hospital is he in? I'm a graduate nurse. I could get in. I would love to go there and laugh at him. I turned back at the door of the City Hall in Atlantic City where we were going to be married 2 years ago and consented to live with him as his common law wife, just because he said if he married, he would be hunted to his ruin by another woman in Cincinnati. He left me and he married that woman, and I have been on his trail ever since. End quote. Oh, dear Pinto Bean, what are you doing? So she was finally told he had died and was charged with homicide without bail. Kincaid's wife was brought in to identify the body and to tell what she knew. She said she didn't know Olivia, but had noticed a woman hanging around the block during the last week. So who are our main players in this tragic tale? Ellis Guy Kincaid. Ellis Kincaid was 54 years old, married, and had lived in Brooklyn for about 2 years. Prior to that, he had lived in Covington, Kentucky, across the Ohio River from Cincinnati, where he had been a lawyer primarily handling criminal law for many years. Olivia Stone. Olivia Stone was 31, a graduate nurse working at the Cincinnati General Hospital and living in Cincinnati. She had killed Kincaid with a .38 caliber revolver. Olivia, being a nurse and all, claimed her training helped her with the shooting. She told the police, quote, I know every vital spot in the human body, and it was my intention to shoot that dirty dog first in the head and then in every other vital spot could find. End quote. When asked by reporters if she had regrets, quote, I don't regret it at all. I'm the happiest woman in the world. Ellis Kincaid is now in the place where the dawn comes up like thunder. End quote. That last part is from a Kipling poem called Mandalay. Backstory of their relationship. Of course, Kincaid is dead, so we don't have his side. Olivia said, quote, he was famous as a lawyer in Cincinnati and he had a nervous breakdown in 1919. I went to nurse him. In a few days, he said he was much better and proposed that we go to Atlantic City. While we were there, he asked me to marry him, but said it must be kept secret because if a woman he knew learned of it, she would make great trouble for him. He asked me to become his common law wife. I refused. End quote. Dude, what were you doing? Both of you. What the heck? Olivia, quote, we started for the city hall to be married. At its door, he finally persuaded me to save him from the trouble he feared. We went back to the hotel, packed up, and moved and went to another one where he registered us as Mr. and Mrs. Ellis G. Kincaid. We went back to Cincinnati, and soon he left me. He married the other woman that fall, and they left and went to New York soon afterward. End quote. If you're confused, just note, Olivia and Kincaid did not go inside of City Hall. They did not get actually married, as in a ceremony with someone with the legal ability to perform marriages, or someone like Elvis. Olivia is claiming they had a common law marriage. Evening Journal, August 6, 1921. Quote, she declared she forced him to resign from the Cincinnati Law School, hired detectives to pursue him when he tried to flee from her, that she, quote, showed him up to his friends, end quote, lay in wait for him at his office in New York, continued the relentless chase for months. Indefatigable in her determination to confront him, and finally met him face to face near his home, end quote. Olivia continued, Quote, when I saw him crossing the street, I approached him and said, "How do you do, Mr. Ellis Kincaid, you dirty rat?" she declared. Ooh, anyone else say that in James Cagney's voice? Then an awful chill came over me. I don't know what I did. I was so excited. I felt as I could jump from New York to Mexico without any difficulty. End quote. She had kept the gun in her purse, a black satin bag. Quote, oh my, but Mr. Kincaid was a very fast worker. He asked me for $1,000 to invest. I gave it to him and never saw it again. I believe he spent it on the Gormley girl, now his wife. I could see his love was waning and decided he must marry me. The dean of the Cincinnati Law School, where he was on the faculty, said he must marry me or be discharged. I got him discharged, all right. That was in 1920. Then he married and disappeared. His friends said he had gone to England. I hired the best detectives, and they located him in New York in 10 days. I retained Theodore Horseman, Cincinnati lawyer, to represent me in a divorce action as Kincaid had made me his common-law wife. I got a judgment of $5,000 for alimony, but never got a cent of it. Then I followed him to New York. I located his office. Every day I waited at that building. Oh, so many days I waited for him. I showed him up to his friends, or those of his friends I was able to see. I told them I dared Ellis Kincaid to face me on Broadway. At last, I grew weary of waiting, so I came to Brooklyn and watched his house. End quote. She had been asked if she knew where he lived. She said, quote, yes, doesn't a general always know his land before he sends his army out? 3 different times I waited for him on the corner near his house, near the place where the woman he had married when he deserted me was also waiting for him, but he always eluded me, until last night. End quote. So backing up this truck a little bit, apparently when Kincaid married Miss Gormley, he did so in secret in 1919 as he was afraid of Olivia. Friends of his had arranged for the marriage and went to the home of some sort of manufacturer where the ceremony was performed. A detective with Cincinnati's detective force acted as a guard at the door while the ceremony was performed. And as you know, time passes, more and more information starts to come out, or to get clarified. Yes, indeed, Olivia had demanded $5,000 in settlement of her grievance, but there was no actual judgment of that amount. She had brought suit, had named Kincaid's now widow as co-respondent, but the justice denied her claim. Kincaid had answered her complaint by saying that he was, quote, unconscious and delirious, end quote, while he was in her care. Remember, he had been ill and she was his nurse, and he alleges that he only had a vague idea of what was going on. Apparently, Olivia's obsession with Kincaid and revenge was well known. Olivia used a nurse's registry to obtain employment. And when the night manager heard about the shooting, he commented, quote, so she killed him, after all, end quote, and went on to explain that people in the office knew about Olivia's issues and that she was supposed to be kept busy by orders of the agency owner. August 9th. Well, unsurprisingly, it's thought that Olivia will plead temporary insanity and says she did not realize what she was doing that night. Yes, she confronted him, called him a dirty rat, and admits to pulling the trigger. And then that's it. That's all she remembers until she came to in the police station. So remember, first they had told her she had wounded him. She said, quote, they told me before that I hit him in the knee, and I was awfully disgusted with myself because I had aimed at his head. I am a nurse and ought to know what part of the body I had hit, end quote. Well, she had hit him in the head at some point. August 11th. So oddly, Olivia in jail is taking a sentimental journey. She's been showing her cellmates, one of whom is who we're talking about next week, the silk lingerie she had as part of her wedding trousseau, and found a book that he had given her with "To Livy from Ellis" inscribed inside. Quote, he gave it to me, he gave it to me. It's the beloved Vagabond by Locke. I want to read it again. Oh, Ellis, Ellis, end quote. Yes, we seem to be in the next stage of murdering someone. Grief? What are the stages to murder? Anywho, this is what she said from her jail cell in front of her 2 lawyers. Quote, I have killed the only man I ever loved. I realize what I have done, and I feel as if a band was around my head. But I want to say this in the beginning. I hope this will be an example to all young girls. I tell them never to trust a man just because of love for him. Ellis Kincaid was the only man I ever loved. God knows I loved him and he loved me. I have always been honorable and true to my ideals. Now Ellis can see it all as it really was. Now he is no longer weak. He will be my spirit lawyer and see me through these awful days. All I have done is to think of him. I believe he knows how I loved him now. If he had only been strong enough to do as he wanted to, all this nightmare would never have happened. I love Kipling and Service. I tried to write a poem telling how I know Ellis must have felt. The poem shows how he felt towards me and how he was hampered by the other life he seemed chained to. The words are supposed to be his, addressed to the woman he married. I fainted when I heard he was to marry her. Ellis loved me, but other influences held him and caused him to make me the worst of my kind. He had me barred everywhere I tried to get work, and nursing was all I could do. I felt as if I could lose my mind when I thought of all the money he owed me. Yet I loved him all the time, and I love him now. I was wild with pain for months, and at the sight of the cause of my suffering, she stops talking here, maybe at the behest of her lawyers. The widow of Kincaid has been fairly quiet since the murder of her husband, keeping to herself, but she did tell reporters of what she knew about Olivia. Quote, about 10 or 11 years ago, the Covington, Kentucky, and Cincinnati newspapers had long accounts of an affair she had with a wealthy Cincinnati businessman. He had suffered a nervous breakdown, like my husband, and she was called in to take care of him. The Stone woman accompanied him on a trip to Europe, and on the way over there was trouble on the ship which the captain had to settle. Miss Stone later preferred charges against the man, but the matter was settled out of court. When she said she used my husband for divorce, she tells of an occasion when the whole matter was threshed out in court and she's told that she had no legal standing. End quote. Apparently, Olivia wrote letters to Kincaid asking for money, etc. Mrs. Kincaid said, quote, Mr. Kincaid had just arranged to set up offices in the Vanderbilt building Monday. I am sure, though, he had a feeling she was here after him. The Stone woman is almost illiterate. She is not from Covington or Louisville, as she has claimed, but from the mountains of Tennessee, and she has all the fiery characteristics of the mountaineers. I believe she is mentally unbalanced. End quote. Now, whoa there, lady. No need to get all sanctimonious and high and instepped about people from Tennessee. Neighbors of the Kincaids say that 3 months earlier, Olivia had threatened to kill the couple. Widow Kincaid continues, quote, although Olivia Stone shot and killed Mr. Kincaid, her actions were influenced by an attorney who continually encouraged the woman's action and advised her as to methods of extorting money and persecuting my husband. Frequently, Ellis Kincaid spoke to me of her demands. When she demanded $5,000, helpless as he was, he believed that he could silence her accusations and threats by giving her the money. She was told to demand this amount. Olivia Stone contends she has too much information concerning the past lives of many of Cincinnati's most prominent people to permit her to reveal all she knows on the witness stand. It would be terrible, for she is a vindictive woman and would not hesitate to drag anyone's character in the mire. I have been told that one Cincinnati woman has engaged an attorney, fearing that Olivia Stone may carry out her threats to expose her if the case is called to trial. End quote. So, to make it official, Olivia has been charged with first-degree murder. She has pled not guilty. We're going to trial. The quote-unquote marriage. Papers have been filed with the New York Supreme Court regarding the relationship of Olivia and Kincaid. The complaint that she had filed in May said that she had been married to Kincaid in Atlantic City, May 1918. He requested that it be secret and assured her that a common law marriage was as legally binding as a normal one. Olivia said, quote, my sole purpose in bringing this action is to protect my name by establishing the marriage between myself and the defendant, and to obtain my freedom from him by divorce. While I feel that every sense of justice entitles me to a substantial alimony, upon which I will insist if successful in this action, it is not the primary object. End quote. Kincaid denied all of this. January 1918, he had taken ill at the home of his brother-in-law. Olivia and another nurse were employed to help take care of them. He admitted that he had taken some trips with Olivia, but said that these were at the orders of the doctors. Kincaid had said, quote, our relations were solely those of nurse and patient, and I was entirely under her control and her charge. I was for a time unconscious, and at other times delirious. In the latter part of August 1918, Miss Stone urged me to marry her. I refused. End quote. Attached to his affidavit was this letter allegedly from Olivia. Quote, "My dear Alice, news came to me this morning that you were not feeling as well as you could feel. The message has grieved me very much, and you don't know how I long to be with you and comfort you in every way that is possible to make you feel better. My dear, I want you to feel, to know, to understand that I am absolutely going to help you get on your feet. What has occurred in the past is forgotten, and we must never refer to it again. I am sorry I wrote you that last letter. I was grieving about you and just felt that I could not be away from you any longer. Dear, you must go away for the summer. You know I have done everything for you, and I know I can get you on your feet. I want you to take me away with you this summer, and there will be absolutely no charge for my services in any way. You know it will do my heart good to be with you again, and just to feel that I am doing something for you. My dear, the $3,000 I have in the bank is all yours, and I want you to feel that there isn't anything in the world that I would not do for you. Hoping these few lines will find you feeling much better, and wishing you well in every way. I remain, yours lovingly, Olivia." End quote. October 10th. Olivia is asking for a writ of habeas corpus so that she can visit a bank vault in Manhattan to get out papers that her lawyer feels are vital to her defense. I don't know what precisely these are, but she was allowed to do so. January 21st, 1922. Olivia tries to break out of the Raymond Street jail in Brooklyn, bolting out of the line to get breakfast. She was chased by a matron, a warden, and the warden's Airedale dog. The dog blocked her path, and she was caught in the kitchen. She had grabbed a knife from a table and was fighting everyone off with that before she was subdued by 4 jail attendants. They took her to solitary confinement. Other than the normal reasons anyone would want to break out of jail, she wanted to look good for her trial and only wished to leave to buy a new suit. In case you're wondering, she was so insistent with her lawyers about this issue that her lawyers went to the New York Supreme Court and obtained special permission to select her, quote, murder trial trousseau, which cost $44. This was according to the Bisbee Daily Review newspaper, April 1st, 1922. Some issues over the size of the room for the trial. The room that Justice Aspinall has ordered is felt to be too small. Olivia's attorney, Edward Riley, wants the bigger room because many women's clubs have asked him for permission to attend. Justice said that he wants no people standing around and that first to be accommodated must be the 50 talesmen, that's the jury, newspaper men, witnesses, and members of both sides of the family. After that, if there's room, people could be admitted in whatever seats are left over. Prosecution opened with discussing Kincaid and his health issues. High professional standing of lawyer in Cincinnati, where at one time he had been corporation counsel, and his nervous breakdown in 1918. He went to Florida, returned, had a relapse. He sought relief in Atlantic City, and his nurse there was Olivia Stone, the defendant. Mr. Warbassi, assistant DA, quote, he was a child in the hands of his nurse. A child mentally and physically. Kincaid returned to Cincinnati, had a relapse, and again returned to Atlantic City. The defendant accompanied him in her professional capacity. Months passed. He was regaining his health, and he married Marie Gormley in Cincinnati in 1919. He went to New York City, where he intended to establish himself professionally. The defendant located him on South Eliot Place in Brooklyn. End quote. So the defense takes the case, apparently accusing Kincaid's wife of being, quote, the former proprietor of a rendezvous for young girls in Cincinnati, association with whom he declared had wrecked Kincaid's life, end quote. That's according to the Albuquerque Morning Journal, March 30th, 1922. Attorney Riley, quote, this is the sad and tragic case of a virtuous and honorable woman whose mind could stand the strain no longer. And we intend to prove that she had no intention of killing Ellis G. Kincaid. During the day, he was a brilliant man and stood at the head of his profession. At night, he sank to the gutter through drugs and physical excesses at a rendezvous for girls 13 and 14 years of age in Cincinnati, run by Marie Gormley until Marie Gormley held him like an octopus in her grasp, end quote. So we already know the basic story according to Olivia. What I hadn't heard before was that he had allegedly bought her a wedding ring, which she wore to the trial. At various hotels afterward, they registered as man and wife. Then he sent her back to Cincinnati, telling her not to tell anyone. I think there was another visit to Atlantic City, registering as Mr. Kincaid and nurse. Went back to Cincinnati, where Kincaid went back to Marie, and Olivia kept doing her nursing work. So then Olivia finds out about the Marie stuff, and then he and Marie were married. According to Olivia's attorney, they destroyed her reputation at the hospital where she worked. She was dropped from the nurses list and left without a position. It was a good year before Olivia allegedly found out about the wedded couple, and she blamed him for everything, asking for a legal separation. And then the murder. So the prosecution has called witnesses who saw the murder. March 31st, 1922. Olivia went on the stand. The prosecution went after her about some letters she had written to Kincaid. One was that she intended to sue him for breach of promise, and that she had told her lawyer all about Marie, and that after the suit was over, she was going to tell her brother about what had happened. Quote, "And you know what will happen to you after he sees me and hears the story." End quote. Warbassy showed her the letter, and she agreed it was her handwriting, but didn't remember writing it. Another letter from May 1920 from her to Kincaid said, quote, "I want you to know that you have been located and your days are numbered." End quote. She agreed it was her letter, and her teardrops, the teardrops comment was stricken from the record. She said she still should be referred to as Mrs. Kincaid. Asked if she had ever been judged insane or committed, she replied, quote, "No, just raving in general," end quote. Of other letters, she claimed, quote, "I was a very sick girl at that time," end quote. Mr. Warbassy tried to bring out that 2 weeks before Kincaid was killed, Miss Stone had told detectives in Cincinnati that she was going to New York to shoot the lawyer. Miss Stone wouldn't admit it, or that they had told her she was foolish. Quote, "Didn't you promise to give them the revolver you carried?" End quote. Quote, "I halfway promised them that," end quote, she replied. So the defense continues, quote, "You believe that if you threatened him, he would right the wrong he had done you?" Her answer, "Yes, sir," came with a flood of tears. Quote, "You never intended to hold him up for $10,000 or $5,000 or by threats on his life?" End quote. "No, God, no." She raised her arm high. "When you wrote, 'Your days are numbered,' you did it merely to frighten him, to get justice from him?" "Oh, yes, sir." Prosecution has brought in witnesses about Olivia and her behavior. From the Casper Daily Tribune, April 4th, 1922. Quote, "Harry Abrams, assistant U.S. attorney in Cincinnati, was the first witness called. He testified that Miss Stone had called at the federal prosecutor's office several times, and once had told him that she was through with Kincaid, did not wish to marry him, and wanted to see him jailed. Abrams' superior previously had testified that she wished to prefer a charge of violating the White Slave Act. Charles Sorry of Nashville testified that in 1906, Miss Stone introduced him on the street to a man named Celery, who she said was her husband." End quote. Olivia had testified that on the day of the shooting, before it occurred, she had gone into some sort of bar and had 3 drinks of gin. The detective and police who arrested her testified that they smelled nothing on her breath within a minute of the shooting. Remember, the one police officer was literally on the opposite corner. Several other witnesses stated that she was going to Brooklyn, and if she found him, she would kill him. That was from 2 Cincinnati detectives. A jailhouse doctor, Dr. Charles Surtzer, said that he attended her during her initial imprisonment and never noted anything odd in the way she acted. She walked into the jail unassisted, and the next day came to his office unassisted to ask for something for her nerves. The U.S. attorney in Cincinnati, who she had denied ever meeting, went on the stand. He stated she had come into his office in 1919 to ask for an arrest warrant for Kincaid under the Mann Act. Olivia fainted at one point, also shouted that Clark was lying, and then speaking under her breath. This was during the trial. Dr. Annette Ralston, specialist on women's disease, said that she believed there was a temporary explosion in Olivia's brain, and that was the cause of the shooting, and that although Olivia was of a neurotic temperament, her history showed no signs of insanity. We've got alienists. Defense is trying to say Olivia was temporarily insane, but Dr. Leahy wasn't having it. District Attorney Warbassy asked, quote, "Taking all this into account, do you think she knew what she was doing?" End quote. "In my opinion, she did." Was she sane or insane? It is my opinion she was sane. Does physical collapse come as a result of great excitement? It often happens that way. So the defense goes on to talk about her life, her nursing, her marriage to Kincaid, etc. Defense attorney Riley, quote, as a result of all these circumstances, might she not have been suffering from severe temporary, transitory, emotional insanity at the time of the shooting? Mr. Riley inquired. Quote, I never heard of such a condition, said Dr. Leahy. Have you ever heard of temporary insanity lasting for a few hours only? Dr. Leahy said, never. It is usually a matter of weeks and months. She might, however, have been suffering from a condition of hysterical insanity when she shot Kincaid. In this condition, there would be a confusion of ideas and actions, but she would recognize right from wrong. End quote. When asked about the gin she alleges to have drunk, the doctor said that no, if anything, the gin would have quieted her nerves. So we've got the last statements before going to the jury. Assistant DA Warbassi to the jury. Quote, judging by the past, there is not much chance that you 12 men will do what you swore to do when you took your places in the jury box. Judging from the past, there is not much hope you will convict a woman, but I am hoping that God will give you strength and courage to bring a verdict of guilty, because this case is not only against Olivia Stone, she is a mere detail, but it is to test the supremacy of American law. When Miss Stone took Kincaid to Atlantic City, where she claimed to have been married to him by common law in 1918, she thought he was a nice piece of fruit just ripe to pluck. She thought he was the right man to vamp, and she vamped him. But he wouldn't stay vamped, and because he wouldn't stay vamped, she killed him. End quote. Defense calling out Mrs. Kincaid to get on the stand and defy what he said about her and her nefarious life. Quote, if the defense comes forward with a defense of insanity, the state must prove Miss Stone sane. It must prove her clear in mind and establish that she knew what she was doing when she shot Kincaid. This is one of the most important cases that has ever been tried in Brooklyn. All the country is watching it. It involves every woman in the United States. Because it involves the honor of every woman in the United States. You have a right to assume that there is someone behind the scenes. And from the names mentioned here, you have the right to assume who it is that is trying to swear away the life of a good Southern girl. The same gang that rules Cincinnati and which drove Olivia Stone out has come down here and is hounding her now. They came to damn a woman's reputation. I'll stop the speech here now if Marie Gormley will go on the stand and defy me to prove what I said she was. Kincaid's relatives and friends are still alive, but they stay behind the scenes. Let one of those Cincinnati lawyers come here and say that this good Southern girl lies. They don't dare. End quote. So, what do you think happened? She was acquitted. They deliberated for 10 hours and then declared her not guilty. She said, quote, thank God it's over. I intend to join my friends and go back to my profession as soon as possible. In work, I may forget. She would say of the verdict, quote, a message to the world from men who did not know when their own might not be placed in the same situation that I was, end quote. The widow Kincaid, quote, I am not bitter concerning the verdict. It was the case of a woman and her story was a plausible one. But I do not believe it, and Ellis never deserved such a fate. I have practically nothing, no funds, nothing, end quote. Assistant DA Warbassi, quote, there are currents of human feeling, depths of human emotion, that override all constitutions and all laws. The jury apparently said, was it just that the deceased depart? Having apparently answered it affirmatively, they said, then let the defendant depart, end quote. Defense attorney Riley, quote, the verdict shows that women still have some rights in the world. That majestic thing they call the law works both ways. It must be apparent by this time that woman is something nobler than the toy of depraved men, end quote. Sure. But white women had only been able to vote for a few years at this point, and women of any other color could not, and in some cases would not, for many years. Women were still not on juries for many more years and depended on which state you lived in. Sorry, back to the story. Apparently, Olivia is receiving many offers of marriage. Really? I mean, we hear all the time about criminals locked up who get all kinds of interesting mail and proposals, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised that this is probably something that's happened for a very long time in history. And back to the fact that many times in these stories that there is more than just the one victim. Mrs. Kincaid, who seemed to have at one point dulled her hate for Olivia to feelings of just pity, would have a lot of mental health issues stemming from everything she had been through. At one point, she was allegedly put in a straitjacket while under observation at a hospital. She had at this point wanted Olivia to go to the electric chair. She would, in a matter of days, be able to go back home. In December of that same year, Olivia would try to take her own life by swallowing poison tablets. She was staying in a New York hotel when she was found by a hotel doctor who happened to be staying across the hall from her and had heard groans coming from her place. He gave her aid and called for an ambulance. Apparently, she had taken the poison 12 hours before that. It appeared to police that she was without any money. She had just recently received a letter from the University of Cincinnati allowing her to practice in New York State. It would take some days, but she would recover and be out of danger. It was said that though she was acquitted, and for the most part public sentiment seemed to be in her favor, the accolades would end, people would get back to their lives, and she could not find work. Or she would find a job and then have to leave once people got wind of who she was. This is not unique, and actually seems, according to at least a Dr. Hochfelder, that women get the worst of it. Quote, many professional men have come back magnificently after acquittal. Sometimes a man has even served a term in prison and yet been reinstated in his profession. It seems most unfair to bar Miss Stone from the profession of nursing, which she practiced for 11 years. She's not any the less capable as a nurse, in spite of what has happened. End quote. So, how do you feel about it? Knowing what I know, I'm surprised she was acquitted. I get the whole temporary insanity thing, but she was after this guy for like 2 years. She went to find where he went and where he lived. She stalked his building for several days. She told people she wanted him dead. She threatened him in letters. Was he innocent? No, absolutely not. At least I don't think so. I think he led her on to some degree. Unfortunately, we don't really know his side of things, but I can assume that he led her on a bit. The pictures of the two of them together, pre-Photoshop, showed them in a love garden, showed them in bathing suits. He was in those pictures. If you're only there with your nurse to get healthy, would you take those kinds of pictures and risk people seeing them and assuming some stuff? Maybe, but particularly in this day and age, back then, did he deserve to die? Of course not.